Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. I'm your host, Calvin Timms, and because this week I'm so excited about these Rate My Roster reviews, I decided that I'm going to do a couple more just to really pump them out before I get back to the regular fantasy football content, where I'm breaking down some busts, sleepers, breakouts, things like that here in the next couple weeks. Rankings as well are coming. I'm working on doing those for the top 12 quarterbacks, maybe top 24 quarterbacks, top 36 running backs, receivers, and then top 12 tight ends. I'm not going that deep on tight ends because I just do not care after the top 12. There will be a few probably names to know after that, but all in all, just sticking to the top 12. But like I said, I want to do quite a few of these Rate My Rosters. I want to do them all off season. If you are interested, or if you missed my first one, please go back and listen to that one. You'll kind of get the whole concept that I'm going for here. But essentially, you fans send in your rosters for review. I'm going to break it down with the league settings that you give me and the players that you gave me, and I'm going to kind of break down the strengths, weaknesses of each of your position groups on your team, where I think that you could use a little bit of work, and then give you a grade for each and every position, and then I'm going to give you one final score at the end. So like I said, if you missed it on the very first one, please go back and listen to that. You can find me on Twitter at TDC_Calvin or on the Dynasty After Dark YouTube channel. I also created a Rumble channel. I don't really know Rumble that well, but it's got some popularity out there. So if you have a Rumble account and that's what you prefer to listen to, feel free to go add Dynasty After Dark on Rumble as well. So that said, let's jump right into the roster that I'm breaking down for today. So this team is one of my league mates from one of my big boy teams, a high dollar, more premium league where it's more expensive for sure. It is a lot more expensive, and with the higher buy-in amounts, and the reason why I'm in quite a few of these is because they are very, very competitive. They're very cutthroat, and I like it because, in my opinion, it just makes you way better at dynasty football, dynasty fantasy football, because I had a few leagues. I've basically cut out all my low value leagues over the last couple of years because I just have so much fun. I have fewer leagues, but more high dollar leagues the last couple of years. And it's just because it's a lot more competitive. It's harder to get trades done. So when you get one done, it feels like an accomplishment. It's harder to move picks and players and everything. And everyone is just trying to win basically every single year because you don't want to be wasting a ton of money in these leagues. So this league specifically is a 12-team PPR league. It's got a 2-point tight end premium bonus. So every catch a tight end makes is 2 points instead of just 1 point plus the yardage and touchdowns and yada, yada, yada. You got one quarterback starter, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex, and a super flex. So 10 starters is already a very deep pool for starters. You got 3 wide receivers, which makes the wide receiver position much more valuable. So that said, this is a very competitive league. Now, going into the quarterback, and I will say this roster last year, I think was first overall. They won the league last year. So I think there's been a couple moves this offseason, so this isn't the full picture. But just to say, when we get into the actual grade, my grade will surprise you when you take into account the fact that this roster won last year. So that said, quarterback position, you got Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson. And again, if you missed the last episode, I'll just give you a brief rundown here. I have it color-coded here on the positional groups. The gold players are your cornerstone players for Dynasty football. Essentially, they're the guys that you're going to have for multiple years. You want to kind of build that position group around these players. You don't really want to trade them unless it's for a massive haul because they're just the elite of the elite players at that position group. and you should have them for multiple years. So that's kind of the definition of the yellow. The green are the good, very, very good players, but they have they're older, or they have a couple red flags that might lower them a little bit in my rankings. The red players, they are the guys that you might have for 1 or 2 more seasons of production, and then after that, they're probably going to be cuttable at that point, or they're just not really going to have much value after that. The purples, they're kind of the question marks. They might be able to move up a tier or 2 this season, or they might move down to the blue, which is the cuttable players down at the bottom there. So the purples are the hardest ones to value, because if they do well and if they perform well, they're going to move up a tier for sure. But I can't really trust them at this point in time to put them in the higher tiers just yet. So that's kind of how I broke out these. There's 5 groupings for each one. If you don't see a color here, it's because I don't think that there is one of that tier on that group. So that said, again, quarterback position, you got 2 elite talents for the quarterback for fantasy football. I know everything going on with Deshaun Watson right now is not the best, but Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson are top 10 talents for fantasy football when they play. I don't care about all the off-the-field stuff with Deshaun Watson unless he gets a for life ban from the NFL. Obviously, he's going to drop off here. But if Deshaun Watson plays, he's going to be an elite talent for fantasy football. Like the guy or hate the guy, it does not matter. For fantasy football only, he is an elite talent. So he is a gold player here. You have 2 very, very good players. Now, the issue with this season is if Watson, because of all the off-the-field stuff, does get suspended for a season or 2 seasons, then it really leaves you very thin at the running back position. But if he gets 5 games or 6 games, 8 games, 10 games, something like that, you'll be able to get him back. Maybe you'll have a little bit of rust that he has to shake off, but you might be able to get some elite games from him yet this year. So he's kind of hard to value for your team for this year, but Kyler Murray is a very good centerpiece to build around for fantasy football. As long as he's playing, he should be very good. And then Jared Goff here in the red tier, I think for fantasy football, he's fine. He's in a super flex league. You're putting him in. He's going to be better than most of the flex options that you're going to be able to slot in there as a third flex. So Jared Goff is good enough. He's not elite. He doesn't give you an edge there, but your edge is if you get Deshaun Watson back. That's where the biggest edge on this team is, in my opinion. Then you got guys down here at the bottom. Tyler Huntley, he's kind of interesting. Again, he showed really, really well last year when Lamar Jackson was out injured. If something were to happen with Lamar Jackson, I think you have a fantasy stud in Tyler Huntley. The problem is he's probably not going to get a starter role without an injury to Lamar, and it's hard to bank on injuries, so I can't do that in good conscience. So Tyler Huntley, he's definitely a question mark. If Lamar were to go to a new team, there's been rumors about that after this year because supposedly Baltimore has offered Lamar a long-term contract, but Lamar just continues to disregard the contract talks. He doesn't want to engage in them, and he's just not signing a long-term contract. So if for whatever reason they moved on from Lamar and decided to kind of give the keys to Tyler Huntley because of what he showed last year, man, he could jump up to an elite talent just because of, for fantasy football, he'd be a green player probably, in my opinion, just because he would be so good for fantasy. So Tyler Huntley is an interesting guy. He could definitely move up, or if they sign Lamar to a long-term contract and he's just always the backup, he'll always have a little bit of value associated with his name as a backup, but without an injury or a starter role, he's just kind of transitioned into the purgatory of fantasy football. Mike White, he's nobody in my opinion. He was just a fill-in while Zach Wilson was injured last year. You can cut him if you need to. Again, all the blue players here, I say that you can cut them for any reason if you needed a roster slot. But if you don't need a roster slot, there's no reason to cut them. So you're just going to let them ride on the bottom of your bench. But yeah, for me, if you needed a roster spot, I'd be fine moving on from Mike White. Now, running back. you can see this is where I have the biggest distinction in tiers here. And I think this is actually the weakest position. Oh, and sorry, I almost forgot. We are going to rank these as we're going. So for the quarterback position, I give you an 8 out of 10. And the reason why is because, again, we have major question marks around Deshaun Watson. Kyler Murray is a definite cornerstone piece for this roster for years to come. Jared Goff is a serviceable option there as your second quarterback this season. And if he plays well enough, they might be able to give him another contract. I doubt that, but it is definitely in the realm of possibilities. And then Watson, you just don't know when you're going to be able to play him. Until that whole suspension comes down, nobody really knows what to expect. So if you had him all year, this would probably be like a 9. But as of right now, I got to give you an 8 just because of the question marks about Watson this season. Running back now, this is where I think it's the weakest position on the roster. Austin Ekeler, he is great. He is going to be locked and loaded this season for fantasy football, in my opinion. He's going to be a top 5 running back as long as he's healthy. I have no questions about Austin Ekeler. Clyde Edwards-Helaire also, I think, is a little bit of a sleeper this year. I like him to be a mid RB2 this season with potentially low-end RB1 upside if he could get utilized in the passing game a little bit more. I told this story on an episode a couple weeks ago. I didn't actually realize this, but Clyde had, I think it was an appendix burst this time last year. He didn't actually he lost a ton of weight in the offseason. He didn't get back up to playing weight, like 195 pounds, until week 6 of the NFL season, somewhere in that range. So he was just beat up all last year. So Clyde, if he can actually get healthy, he showed as a rookie some explosion, but it is tough to bank on him having a year 3 breakout. It is definitely within the realm of possibilities, but it's hard to bank on that. So I can't put him in that gold tier just yet. And Austin Ekeler, he can't be gold as well just because he is older. I don't know how many years he has left, and he's been a little banged up the last couple seasons. Now, the other running backs here in the purple tier, Raheem Mostert, he's someone that's kind of interesting. I think that he's going to have fantasy relevant weeks for fantasy football, but I just don't know when they're going to be and how healthy he'll be. But the problem is you have Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert on the same roster. It's possible that these guys kind of vulture each other, where Mostert has a good week this week and then the next week that Chase Edmonds is the guy, and you never really know which of these two guys to start. At least if you had one or the other, you could plug them in and just hope that it's that guy's week, but you could really Russian roulette yourself with these two guys and basically hit the bullet every single time because you never know which one you're going to want to play. Darrell Williams with Arizona, he's someone that's kind of interesting. James Conner, I have him is a locked and loaded stud. He should be an RB1 this season, in my opinion. But Darrell Williams could potentially come in and steal a lot of the third down work for this team. And without DeAndre Hopkins, there's a chance that Williams gets off the ground running pretty heavily early on in the season. Kene Nwangwu, I think that's how you spell his name or pronounce his name. He's an interesting guy. I think Alexander Mattison is a free agent after this season. I don't think that they're going to sign Alexander Mattison to a long-term contract. So he is in line for potentially a backup role to Dalvin Cook in the next couple years. And I think that he's got a good skill set, but really he doesn't have much more than ever backup role potential to me, but sometimes you just got to hang on to those guys. But then you can look at the blue guys here. Matt Breida, again, he was kind of like a Kene Nwangwu. That's who you're kind of hoping he can be. Matt Breida went around the league for multiple teams and was able to fill the backup role, and you always kind of had hype on him, but he's on another team. It's like the 5th straight year of him being on a new team. So at some point, you just got to be able to cut the cord and sign this guy off. And for me, that's this year with Matt Breida. I'm done with it. I don't really care too much. Again, if you don't need a roster spot, you're just going to carry him through the season. Same with Tyler Johnson, Tyson Williams, Jashawn Corbin, these guys. I don't really care about any of them, to be honest with you. So if you need a roster spot, you can move on from any of them. I'd probably start from the bottom up here on this tier, but You're free to do whatever you want. Going into the wide receiver, and this is where it gets a little bit more challenging because it is a 3 wide receiver league and it's full PPR. So Cooper Kupp, locked and loaded stud, nothing really to say there. Really like him quite a bit. The problem with this group of guys here is he definitely lacks elite talent at the top. Elijah Moore is someone that is very interesting. People are very, very high on Elijah Moore. The problem is, and I know that this owner is a massive Jets fan, so take this with a grain of salt, but Elijah Moore, the problem is he's behind Garrett Wilson, and he's also behind Corey Davis. Everyone is acting like Corey Davis is dead, and I think that in reality, Elijah Moore is probably 3rd in line for targets this season, and nobody likes to face that. Everyone wants to put him as the top 2 guy and put Corey Davis out on the corner in the street, but I just don't think that's the case. I think that Corey Davis is the one that is going to demand a target share. He was Zach Wilson's number 1 target last season when he was healthy, and I just don't see much changing from that. Now, I really like Elijah Moore. I don't want to say this and make it sound like I don't like Elijah Moore. I just find it very hard for Elijah Moore to have fantasy relevant value week to week. He'll have good games. They all will. All 3 of those guys are going to have good games. But the problem is, I don't know if the volume is going to be consistent for any of them to give you a good fantasy performance every single week. And when you have to start one of these guys basically every single week, because the depth here on these wide receivers is not the greatest, with 2 flex, 3 wide receivers and 2 flex, it does get a little bit more challenging there. So you need that wide receiver 2 and 3 on your roster to really have a good week so that you can not blow the week. So Elijah Moore and Jahan Dotson, very good for dynasty football. Don't get me wrong there, but they're very young. So this season specifically, I do have concerns. Now, Jahan Dotson, he might be able to carve out enough of a workload this season, but again, he's a rookie. Terry McLaurin's still there. Curtis Samuel's there. I don't really love Carson Wentz that much. For fantasy football. But yeah, Jahan Dotson, it'll be an uphill battle for fantasy relevancy in year 1. But there's always a possibility that if Carson Wentz craps out this year, he's done. They're going to move on from him, and they'll probably target someone in the draft next year. Then you're looking at maybe a year 2 spike with a rookie quarterback next year, but we might be looking at 3 years for Jahan Dotson to be fantasy relevant, and I just don't know if I really love that for competing this year. Robbie Anderson with Carolina, he's someone that I think you will have good weeks from, but like most wide receivers, he's going to be boom or bust. Most wide receivers are boom or bust, by the way. So Elijah Moore, it's just whether or not you can predict when those busts are. Some of them are easier to predict than others, but Robbie Anderson last year was impossible to predict. I think the best case scenario for Robbie Anderson is if they actually move on to Matt Corral. Sam Darnold, I just don't think has it. I think that he's not very good. I want to see what Matt Corral can do, and I think that Matt Corral has a better arm than Sam Darnold as well. So I think Matt Corral would be able to sustain drives better than Sam Darnold. So I think the best thing for fantasy would be if Matt Corral can come in here, but I think you'll be able to get good weeks out of Robbie Anderson occasionally as the season goes on, but it's just hard to predict which ones those will be. Julio Jones is still a free agent, but if he signs somewhere, I think that he might have a fantasy relevant season, still 1 or 2 left in him. I just can't trust it. It's hard to predict it without him having a team at this point in time. I think the rumors are that he's still kind of injured right now, so we'll see what can happen there. He needs to be healthy. Julio hasn't been healthy in a few years at this point, but if Julio can get healthy, he can still be good for fantasy football. Russell Gage, Terrace Marshall, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, Denzel Mims, and KJ Osborne, I have them all in this purple tier here. Literally all of these guys could move up a tier or 2 in the rankings here based on this season. Terrace Marshall, it's and one thing too, with almost every player here for fantasy football, if they're young and they have if they have like 0 or 1 or 2 years of experience, it's very hard for me to put them as a cut candidate unless they're just nobody that I've ever heard of before. Like Terrace Marshall, he was very highly touted last season. It didn't work out that well for him as a rookie. I'm not writing him off completely just yet. I'm not going to trust him whatsoever. Don't get me wrong there, but I'm going to see what he has. And if he shows something this year, because Robbie Anderson is ahead of him, but he's not really the best talent in the world. If he can pass up Robbie Anderson on this roster this year, then he might be able to carve out a good role for himself moving forward. Oh, and well, we'll get to that here in a second. But Russell Gage is another guy. With Chris Godwin potentially being injured to start the season, he could carve out a decent role with Tom Brady. Now, when Godwin's back, I think that's going to push Russell Gage back a little bit further. But, you know, if you can get 5 or 6 good weeks of Russell Gage at the beginning of the year, and let's say that Godwin's hamstring or ACL tear makes him a little rusty, slow to get out the gate at the beginning of the year, Russell Gage might have a full season's worth of value potentially, and he could be in more of an AB role for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And AB was very good for fantasy football. So, you know, it's possible that Russell Gage is being slept on quite a bit. He's someone that I've been trying to add in a few leagues, and he definitely could make that step up. Denzel Mims for the Jets, he's someone that's been standing out in camp all offseason so far. It's hard to trust him after year 3, but, you know, we'll see what he can do. Again, I just talked about this with Elijah Moore, but he's got a lot of guys ahead of him. Corey Davis, Elijah Moore. He's got Garrett Wilson ahead of him. So he needs to be able to make a name for himself early. And this offense is just so deep. It's so loaded. It's hard for me to trust any of them for fantasy football. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, he had a lot of success last year with Ryan Tannehill when nobody was healthy. So he's someone just to keep your eye on. He's going into year 2, I believe. He was a rookie last year, and he showed pretty well. So if he can show a little bit more this year, then he's someone that might be able to carve out a decent role for himself in fantasy football. He's not going to be ever worth an elite option, but he might be someone that you can go to, kind of like a Tim Patrick in a pinch. So someone to just keep your eye on there. And KJ Osborne, same thing. With the new coaching staff in Minnesota, the old coaching staff really loved the run the ball mindset. They really like the 2 tight ends. We're going to use these guys to block, to help the run game, and we're never really going to use the wide receiver 3 for this team. Well, the new guy is coming over from the Rams, and the Rams barely ever use a tight end. So that means they're going to use the third wide receiver a lot more, and that is KJ Osborne, which is why he's a little bit interesting. Again, he could move up a tier here, but it would take quite a bit to prove that to me. And before anyone says, oh, well, how is Kirk Cousins going to maintain 3 wide receivers? He has done it before. He did it in Washington. In Washington, he was able to feed Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson, and Jamison Crowder in one season, one fantasy season, because he has so many yards and he throws so much with a good rate there. I think with a Rams style offense, he could really explode for fantasy football. So KJ Osborne, again, is another guy that I like to keep my eye on. I don't think he'll ever be an elite option, but with Kirk Cousins, I think that he might have some hidden value for this team. All right. Now, what I was thinking about earlier was I'm so bad about this. I just like talking about all the position rankings that I forgot to put the ranking, the grade that I gave for the running backs. So because of the lack of elite options in this grouping of running backs, and also the questionable depth, I gave running back a 5. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. So yeah, it's like I said, the weakest grouping on this whole team. Wide receiver, I'm actually going to, not by much, give it a 6. And again, you have Cooper Kupp at the top, but after that, you have a lot of question marks. I like some of these guys for dynasty football, for long term, Elijah Moore, Jahan Dotson, but Robbie Anderson, Jahan Dotson, if you have to rely on them this year to compete, I don't really love it that much. Again, those purple guys, maybe I'm giving you the optimistic view for them on what they could potentially do this season, but there's an equally likely chance that they do nothing for you for fantasy and they're complete bust. So I have to be realistic here and give the wide receiver grouping a 6. Now we get to the tight end position, and this is where the roster redeems itself a little bit here. So at the top, we got Mark Andrews of Baltimore, elite option, cornerstone piece here, number 3 tight end for Dynasty for me personally. We got Pat Freiermuth with Pittsburgh, Mike Gesicki with Miami, who they re-signed this year. You got Jeremy Rucker with the Jets. He was a 5th round pick this year in the draft. John Bates with Washington, he was a rookie last year, and Jacob Harris with the Rams, who was also a rookie last year. So again, like I said with the wide receivers, I can't put John Bates and Jacob Harris in a blue tier just yet. They were rookie tight ends last year. Tight ends always take longer to develop. So you're just going to ride with these guys for a little while, see if they can develop into anything. More than likely, these bottom 3 never will become something, but there is a chance. So you're just going to ride with them for a while. And unfortunately, it's tight end, so you have to wait even longer. But with it being 2-point tight end premium, it makes hitting on those guys a little bit more valuable, that you want to hang on to them a little bit longer. So there's no problem there with those bottom 3 guys. At the top, though, Mark Andrews, elite option. Pat Freiermuth, I actually think is sneaky kind of good this year. I know a lot of people are down on him because, all he did was score touchdowns with Ben Roethlisberger last year. Yeah, he did that as a rookie. I mean, they're going to get him more involved in the passing game this year. And Mitch Trubisky, if you remember, likes the tight end position. I mean, Jimmy Graham, are we forgetting what 85-year-old Jimmy Graham did with the Chicago Bears when Mitch Trubisky was the quarterback? He had like 9 touchdowns with Mitch Trubisky. We're really thinking that Pat Freiermuth can't do that again? I don't think so. So why I say that in the double negative sense. I think that Pat Freiermuth can do that with Mitch Trubisky. So Pat, I think that he's going to be good for a PPR, 2-point PPR. That's where it gets a little bit iffy here because he's not really the high volume type of guy. He's a high touchdown guy, but when you get a touchdown, when you rely on these high touchdown guys, every single catch that they get is just bonus icing on the cake. So do definitely like Pat Freiermuth there. And then Mike Gesicki is someone who was very good last year. They re-signed him. They have a head coach who's coming over from the San Francisco 49ers, who George Kittle is the number 2 dynasty tight end for me right now. And Mike Gesicki is an athletic freak of nature. So are we really thinking that Gesicki can't step into a Kittle type of role for this team? He had a ton of volume last season, and I know it's a deeper class of players here with Tyreek there. You got Jalen Waddle, but it's not that deep. They did get rid of Devontae Parker. They've got all the running backs in the world, but just like the Niners, it's 2 wide receivers and a tight end and then 1 million running backs. So it is possible that Mike Gesicki has a very good connection with Tua at this point in time. And Tua has looked to Mike Gesicki in situations of importance and really likes to target him when he's in trouble. So I like that quite a bit. And this is where I give the tight end position a 9 out of 10 here. Definitely, like I said, redeemed it a little bit here because for fantasy football, those top 3 guys, if you put them in your starter tight end and your 2 flex options, and this is how crazy 2-point tight end premium is, that will actually be better than some of the flexes that he's going to be able to put out on a week-to-week basis. That tight ends just massively overperform in 2-point tight end premium. So I really like that as well. Now, you see here, I do have a score here for the depth, and this is actually the second lowest score on the team. It's tied with the running backs. I just don't think there's a ton of depth here. Again, he won the league last year, so I think that if I remember right, he sold out a little bit to get a little bit more of the elite options, the Mark Andrews, the Cooper Kupps, the Kyler Murrays. I know he definitely traded for Kyler and Andrews, if I remember right. And it worked out. it worked out for him well. He won the title last year, but it has left him a little bit more depleted. Now, you'll look at the draft picks going forward in 2023 and 2024. In 2023, he has a lot of picks. So he's got an extra first, 2 extra seconds. That is definitely going to help with the depth. The problem is it's not going to help you this season unless you're using those picks to go and get players. So if it was me, I might consider using one of those first, maybe a first and a second to go get an elite option at running back. I think that it would definitely just help this roster kind of with the depth issue. You have to start 2 of these guys. You're starting Austin Eckler and Clyde Edwards-Helaire basically every week. If something happens to Clyde or Eckler, and you have to switch to somebody else, all right, you're starting Chase Edmonds or Raheem Mostert. What if it's an Edmonds week and Mostert goes off, right? It's just very risky to run with only 2 decent, comfortable running backs when you have to start 2 of them. So I would consider using some of that draft capital to go get a running back for next year. And then same with the wide receiver position. And I know he's been looking for wide receivers in this league because he's trying to get some of my wide receivers, but I would definitely be trying to get probably 2 wide receivers in this league, just for a comfort standpoint. They don't have to be elite options. It doesn't have to be a gold guy or even a green guy. Maybe we go get someone like a Brandon Cooks or maybe even a Jamison Crowder, somebody that you can feel good about putting in to your wide receiver 2 or 3 slot every single week, where they're not going to kill you, but they're not going to maybe overperform as well. So I think those are the 2 biggest sections of need on this team. And the way I look at it too, the 2023 draft picks, right? The whole reason why everyone is so excited about them is because of the quarterbacks and the running backs next year, right? If you need a wide receiver, the wide receivers in this year's draft class are just as good as the wide receivers from next year's draft class. The difference is at the end of this season, they're going to have a year of experience under their belt. They're not going to be rookies next year. Next year, you're going to have to deal with rookie wide receivers. So if I have, and I've been doing this in a few leagues where I need a wide receiver, send a 2023 first that you're hoping is a later first, whatever, for a wide receiver for this year's draft class, right? Go get one of those guys. Go get a Drake London, a Treylon Burks, a Jameson Williams, one of those top guys, Chris Olave, however you rank them, Garrett Wilson, because the guy's a huge Jets fan, right? Go get one of the wide receivers from this year's draft class and just let them develop on your team. You're giving up a first that you're probably going to use on a wide receiver anyway, and you just get the guy early. You get him a year earlier, so or the seconds for sure, right? Unless you're definitely planning on going running back with those 2 first-round picks next year, I would definitely consider at least sending one of them for a wide receiver. So, or a running back in this year's to help you perform for this year, because back-to-back winnings, man, in a high-dollar league is definitely valuable. So that's my thoughts on this roster. And that said, we're going to go into the final score. And I did this last time, but I had it all set up for this, but I actually have a drum roll for the final score. I just last time forgot to turn off the score before I did it. So here is the drum roll. And let's go. And the final score is 7 out of 10 for this roster. So again, the strengths on this roster are definitely the quarterback and the tight end position. Definitely carrying the rating here on the team. But the running back and wide receiver are just too weak for these draft settings. You got to start 2 running backs every single week, 3 wide receivers every single week, and you got 2 flex. Right now, your tight ends are your starter and your 2 flex. But if something, again, happens in injury with any of those guys, now you got to get another flex in there, and your depth options are just not that good. So with the weak depth, weak running back grouping, and not a great 3 wide receiver grouping as well, I think it definitely does bring the grade down. And I was thinking about this with if you actually followed and saw the first rate my roster, I was a little bit harsh on my grade. I actually, looking back, probably should have gave that guy a 9. I rounded down to an 8. Just looking at the difference in the 2 rosters, maybe I was a little harsh, but this one's a 7 out of 10. I think it's more accurate to actual how this team should perform. But, the guy did win the league last year, so I can't write it off just yet and underrate the team because he's probably going to beat me again this year, so I can't complain too much there. So that is my thoughts here on this roster. If you are interested in me reviewing your roster for a breakdown, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at TDC_Calvin. Give me a follow and shoot me a DM. Or you can comment on the YouTube video or the Rumble video, the Dynasty After Dark. Follow me on either one of those two platforms. If you do follow me on whatever your streaming service is, however you listen to the podcast, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the video. Just helps me with the algorithm. I really like doing this type of content because, one, it helps a specific team, but also gives you a little bit of context on how to approach your roster. You can break it down just like this. You can put it in your tiers. Maybe you have your rankings a little bit different than me. Maybe Deshaun Watson isn't a gold player. Maybe he's a purple player for you. But maybe for example, Austin Eckler's a gold. Well, it lets you see the strengths and the weaknesses for your roster specifically, and you can really start to look at, where do I need help to compete this year? Where do I need help long term? And then what do I do about that? Where do I have some flexibility to move some pieces around? Because if you want to fix one group, you got to send something, right? You can't just make a running back happen out of nowhere. You have to send a first round pick. You have to send a player for that running back to get him back. So where do you have that flexibility to move from one area and strengthen another? So breaking it down like this, I really like this type of content. Please be sure to, like I said, like, comment, and subscribe. Just help this video get out there and tell your friends about it. I really like this type of content. So thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you. Have a good night.